encouraging her boyfriend to kill himself. 20-year-old Michelle Carter is charged with involuntary manslaughter for sending Conrad Roy a series of text messages back in 2014 urging him to commit suicide. Police later discovered Roy inside his pickup truck, dead of carbon monoxide poison. If convicted, Carter could face up to 20 years in prison. Michelle Carter waived her right to a jury trial, a strategic move to be sure, and we're expecting the judge to announce his verdict very shortly. Carter's defense attorney is saying that her text messages are protected speech and that Roy's voluminous social media profile should be considered to shed light on his state of mind leading up to his death, that he is the sole cause of death. We'll be bringing you the verdict as soon as the judge renders it.
Story that we've been closely following.
We have indeed. We are awaiting the Fox News alert, an update on Congressman Steve Scalise, who remains in critical condition inside a Washington hospital as his Republican and Democratic colleagues came together last night for an all-American show of unity.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Childers.
And I'm Greg Jarrett. Well, their doctors are saying that Congressman Scalise has shown some improvement after being shot while practicing for last night's congressional charity baseball game. Lawmakers offering prayers and support for the field, and President Trump even sending his encouragement from the White House.
By playing tonight, you are showing the world that we will not be intimidated by threats, acts of violence, or assaults on our democracy. The game will go on.
And go on it did, with the Star-Spangled Banner taking on a very special meaning.
An extraordinary night at the ballpark, and here with a wrap of the game and Congressman Scalise's condition, Doug McElway. He's live from MedStar Hospital in Washington. Hi, Doug.
Hi, Heather. And for the first time since Steve Scalise was hospitalized, we've gotten our first tidbit, just a smidgen of good news, and it comes in the form of a statement released by the hospital at 8:10 p.m. last night. It said, and I quote now, "Earlier today, Congressman Steve Scalise underwent a second surgery related to his internal injuries and a broken bone in his leg. He remains in critical condition, but has improved in the last 24 hours. The congressman will require additional operations and will be in the hospital for some time. At the request of the family, we will continue to provide periodic updates." So that was over 12 hours ago, and no updates from the hospital since then. But from our Capitol Hill producer, Chad Pergram, who has a lot of great sources who know Steve Scalise very well, he's getting more frequent updates about the congressman's condition from non-hospital sources. And he is telling us that, quote, "Scalise appears to be doing slightly better. No official change in his condition yet. Fox is told that doctors may give Scalise a day or so to rest after 2 rounds of surgery, but they could go back in today. Fox is told additional surgeries would be to fix other things. That's why they would wait a day. The fact that they are now considering other things with Scalise, like broken bones, indicates a minor improvement in this condition, but officially still critical." And I texted the hospital this morning about whether or not Scalise was able to watch the congressional charity game last night. No response from them. But if he was able to watch the game, he would have obviously had to have been very inspired by the appearance of Officer David Bailey, who was injured in the attack and is credited with bringing down the gunman. He threw out the first pitch last night. You can see him on crutches there, a true hero in this game. And it was a tremendously emotional moment. And lastly, we have now heard from the widow of the gunman, James Hodgkinson, in an impromptu press conference with reporters yesterday. She refused to answer any questions about her husband's politics and whether they may have motivated this shooting. She told them that he went to Washington last winter to work on tax reform, on changing tax categories, in a very sort of obscure reference to that. She was also asked about the people that her husband shot. Here's what she had to say.
Is there anything you want to say to the victims who were shot?
I don't even know who was shot. They haven't, no. I'm sorry that he did this, but there's nothing I can do about it.
She will obviously be a pivotal influence in helping the FBI piece together what led up to this horrific attack. Heather, back to you.
Yeah, well, definitely thankful that he's doing a little bit better. Thank you so much, Doug.
Just hours after that show of unity, President Trump heading to Miami. He's en route right now with Florida Senator Marco Rubio and Vice President Pence will be joining them there. The president's set to deliver remarks sometime this afternoon. He'll be talking about Cuba. He intends to begin rolling back some of President Obama's major policies toward normalizing relations. Kevin Court joins us now live from Miami with more on that. And new developments, Kevin, in the special counsel's investigation as well.
Yeah, right on the money there, Greg. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But you're right, the president making his way here to the Magic City of Miami, the Little Havana section of the city, where he's expected to make remarks that will draw a clear distinction between his administration's policies and the efforts, frankly, to help the Cuban people and that of his predecessor, President Barack Obama. Now, the major elements will really center on trying to get the money from U.S. tourism and business into the hands of the Cuban people themselves and not simply help the Cuban government. And in particular, there is a great effort to make certain that that money, the tourism dollars, etc., don't flow to the Cuban military. They're also going to push for more religious freedom, more access to the internet, and the release of additional political prisoners.
The president's doing a very exciting thing for the Cuban people. Our unity is with the Cuban people, not the oppressive Cuban regime that has benefited from these changes in the Obama administration policies that helped the military, the security, and the intelligence entities there benefit from U.S.-derived funds. That has to stop.
Also today, there are reports as the probe into so-called Russian meddling in the 2016 campaign continues. Investigators are now said to be looking into the finances of White House advisor Jared Kushner. But in a statement, his team said the following: look, we don't know what this report refers to. It would be standard practice for the special counsel to examine financial records to look for anything related to Russia. Mr. Kushner previously volunteered to share with Congress what he knows about Russia-related matters. He will do the same if he is contacted in connection with any other inquiry. And I think I should also pass this along, Greg. I think you might find this interesting. We learned today the president will, in fact, back away from a campaign promise to send so-called dreamers back home. Those are the children of people who came here unlawfully or overstayed their visas and through no fault of their own. So those folks, of course, will be now staying right here in the USA. Back to you.
Kevin Court. Kevin, thanks very much. Heather?
Well, politics will always be a tough business, but the attack on Republican lawmakers that left Congressman Steve Scalise in critical condition has brought out a spirit of unity, at least temporarily, that Washington has not seen in years. And it was on full display at last night's ball game, where both the House leaders and the Senate leaders, they all stood together in support of their severely injured colleague.
We're all close to Steve Scalise. He's a lovely person. But this game is a game where we always come to have fun, root for everybody to do their very best, and hope that our team wins. Tonight, we're all Team Scalise.
It's a tough age. It's a partisan, polarized country. What we're trying to do is tone down the rhetoric, lead by example, and show people we can disagree with one another. We can have different ideas without being vitriolic, without going to such extremes.
I'm joined now by Glenn Hall, U.S. News editor for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
First of all, your thoughts on last night and seeing everyone there together and the show of unity.
I think it was really good for Congress and good for their constituents to see that they can actually come together and be civil with each other and not, as Paul Ryan was saying, not have such a high level of vitriol coming out. So I thought that was a very good moment, and it was nice to see.
This was amazing right here on the second base, where they all took a knee and kneeled, you know, because obviously the second base during the practice is where Steve Scalise was, in fact, shot. So how can we make this continue?
Yeah, that's kind of up to the leaders of both parties. We saw Nancy Pelosi from the Democrats and Paul Ryan from the Republicans there representing the House, sitting down together. If they can continue to have that level of leadership, showing that they intend to tamp down the highly vitriolic rhetoric and work more on agreeing to disagree where necessary or finding common ground where possible, I think that's where it all starts.
But we've seen this before, and it hasn't lasted very long. I mean, after Gabby Giffords was shot, also even following 9/11.
Yes, and I think we also have to acknowledge that within both parties themselves, there's disagreement and discord.
That's true.
You see some extremities in both cases creating conflict within the party, both Republicans and Democrats facing a little of that.
Healthcare with Republicans right now.
Absolutely. You're having a challenge between more conservative members of the Senate and moderate members of the Senate trying to find out where their compromise is. You also see within the Democrats a much more liberal wing emerging in influence and more moderate wing, struggling to find its way.
Right.
So.
And as a result of this, in part, we have a lot of these unnamed sources that keep coming out. The most recent being, or one of the most recent being, that Jared Kushner, his business dealings are now under investigation. So how do you deal with these unnamed sources?
Yeah,
Every day we're hearing from them.
It's true. Different media getting different scoops at different times. At the Wall Street Journal, we're very careful with our sources. We vet them very carefully. We try to also make sure we understand why they're talking to us. Are they in a position to know what they're telling us? And can we corroborate that information through other means? And the challenge in all of this is that the official sources are not yet ready to tell us what's going on, but there's a desire to keep the readers and audience and viewers informed about what is happening, what is the state of play, and of course to put context in. We see the president tweeting about things, you see other people talking about things, and we're trying to help people really understand what's going on.
But the context being the key there, because viewers or readers at home, they don't know who has supplied the information, so they don't know their background if they have a reason to be swaying their opinion one way or the other.
That's always the challenge here, and certainly we want whenever possible to have the the horse's mouth, so to speak, telling us exactly what's going on. In a case like an investigation, you want to know what they're looking at, you want to find out where they're looking, but it doesn't necessarily, and we have to be careful about this, looking at something doesn't mean they're going to find something.
And on the issue of being fired or being investigated for firing Comey.
Absolutely, that's what's going on. Where most of these sources are focused on trying to get information out, also us trying to get information extracted. But what the challenge here is: are they looking here? Are they looking there? And the information starts to leak out because the people who are being talked to are saying, "Hey, they called me," right? And so we need to look into that, find out where they're headed.
Right, and see if they're breaking the law by releasing a lot of that information.
Well, that's the other side of all of this, and it's a frustration to the president and frustration to those conducting the investigation, I'm sure, that information is leaking out. But it's going to happen in such a high-profile case.
I mean, but like this every day. All right, Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. Greg?
This is a Fox News alert. We want to go quickly inside the courtroom where that young woman you see on the screen, her name is Michelle Carter, stands accused of involuntary manslaughter for sending hundreds of text messages to her boyfriend, urging him to kill himself. He did. And now the judge, there is no jury in this case. She waived her right to a jury. The judge, Lawrence Moniz, is reading his decision. Let's listen.
There is a duty to take reasonable steps to alleviate the risk. The reckless failure to fulfill this duty can result in a charge of manslaughter. Knowing that Mr. Roy is in the truck, knowing the condition of the truck, knowing, or at least having a state of mind, that 15 minutes would pass, Ms. Carter takes no action in the furtherance of the duty that she has created by instructing Mr. Roy to get back into the truck. She admits in a subsequent text that she did nothing. She did not call the police or Mr. Roy's family. She knew his location, again, according to a text that she sent, as being at the Kmart Plaza. According to one of her emails and other credible evidence, according to other credible evidence, the police officers who testified, the location where Mr. Roy's truck was located was approximately 1/2 mile from the Public Services Office of Fairhaven, which included both the fire department and the police department. She did not notify his mother or his sister, even though just several days before that, she had requested their phone numbers from Mr. Roy and had obtained them, and had opened a line of communication with Camden Roy on, I believe, July 10th, but just a few days before the events in question. She called no one. And finally, she did not issue a simple additional instruction: get out of the truck. Consequently, this court has found that the Commonwealth has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Ms. Carter's actions and also her failure to act, where she had a self-created duty to Mr. Roy since she had put him into that toxic environment, constituted each and all wanton and reckless conduct. And this court further finds that the Commonwealth has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that said conduct caused the death of Mr. Roy. This court does not find that the intentionality necessary for such wanton and reckless conduct is obviated by Dr. Bregan's theory of involuntary intoxication, in that the court did not find that analysis credible. Ms. Carter, please stand. This court, having reviewed the evidence and applied the law thereto, now finds you guilty on the indictment charging you with the involuntary manslaughter of the person Conrad Roy III. This court further finds that the Commonwealth has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that you are a youthful offender and you are a Judge Scholl at this time. You may be seated. That verdict is now recorded, and it is in writing as well. Commonwealth, do you wish to be heard? Pardon me? Sentencing is not appropriate at this time. Chapter 119, Section 58 requires that a pre-sentencing report be prepared and given to the judge before sentencing can be imposed.
Well, the judge, in a rather stunning decision, has found this young woman, Michelle Carter, guilty. She sent a myriad of text messages to her boyfriend encouraging him to kill himself. He had strung a pipe affixed with carbon monoxide into his truck, and he sat there and he died. Her messages to him right beforehand were, "Get back in your truck." Another one, "I thought you wanted to do this, just do it." And so even though there is no crime in the state of Massachusetts that criminalizes assisted suicide, there is involuntary manslaughter, which is reckless behavior causing somebody else's death, and the judge so found. Let's go to Molly Lyons, standing by live outside the courthouse in Massachusetts. So, Molly, it was a strategic decision not to use a jury. She waived it, thought maybe that the judge would construe the law in her favor. He did not.
Yeah, one of the theories behind that decision was that it would take some of the emotion out of this trial that could have been played out before a big trial with a large jury. And in fact, the judge did at many times during the trial actually say, you know what, we don't need to play that in open court. I'll take a look at it later in chambers. I'll review all of this evidence. So in a sense, it did speed the trial and push it forward. Now he has made his determination of guilty. And one of the things that he kept hammering in on as he was explaining how he reached that decision was wanton and reckless behavior. Ms. Carter was accused of involuntary manslaughter, and that was a key part of this case. She had to know what she was doing and press forward. And he makes the argument, the Judge Lawrence Moniz, who this was all put into his hands, he makes the argument that she knew what she was doing. Her actions created this situation. And there was a particularly key point, a key text throughout the course of this trial that he referred to when he said she acknowledged later that she knew of her actions. That was a text between herself and a friend of hers, a friend named Sam, in which months later she acknowledged to her friend Sam what she believed she had done. This is the text. She says in this text, "Sam, his death is my fault. Like, honestly, I could have stopped him. I was on the phone with him, and he got out of the car because it was working, and he got scared, and I, expletive, told him to get back in, Sam, because I knew he would do it all over again the next day, and I couldn't have him live the way he was living anymore. I couldn't do it, and I wouldn't let him." Now, prosecutors really hammered home on that point. And the judge argues that she understood the toxic environment of that vehicle. And throughout the course of the trial, prosecutors made the argument that she actually helped him create that toxic environment, offering suggestions. And that, in fact, towards the end of his life, in the days prior to him actually committing suicide, that she mocked him when he put things off. On the actual day of his death, here's an exchange between the two, between Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy. She says, "You can't think about it. You just have to do it. You said you were going to do it. Like, I don't get why you aren't." He replies, "I don't get it either. I don't know. So I guess you aren't going to do it then. All that for nothing. I'm just confused. Like you were so ready and determined." He replies, "I am going to eventually. I really don't know what I'm waiting for, but I have everything lined up." Later in the day, she actually asked Roy to promise that he would do it that day. He did. She told him, "You can't break a promise," and she actually suggested at that point finding a quiet parking lot. That, of course, is exactly what we know he did. Greg?
Molly Line outside the courthouse. Molly, thanks very much. Let's go to our two guests, both of them lawyers, Fred Tisi and Ashley Merchant. Fred, let me start with you. The defense will appeal. The lawyers will probably argue a couple of things. First, she doesn't really have a duty of due care to him. They're not even in the same location. And second of all, that he is the sole proximate cause of his own death, not her, and you've got to show causation. What do you think?
I think both of those are stone losers. Greg, you know, I have 4 sons between the ages of 15 and 22. I find this woman's conduct repulsive, repugnant, and disgraceful. I'm sorry. What the judge
found... But does
that
make it the cause of his death?
Well, but back up for a minute. You have to show 2 things. You have to show that her conduct was reckless or wanton, and also you have to what he did is he found that she, by creating the conditions, created a duty that she violated. And under law, if you create the duty, you can't violate it. And the fact of the matter is you don't have to show causation. You actually have to show that it was reckless and even unintentional. But it's reasonably foreseeable, knowing that a young man wants to commit suicide, and you tell him to go ahead and do it, that it does is a contributing factor. And I think that's enough.
Ashley, you can't just look at 1 or 2 texts. You have to look at the whole body of texts. And what you find is that at one point in time, she encouraged him to get help. She said, "Come with me, we'll get therapy together." And he refused to do that. He at one point proposed a Romeo-Juliet style double suicide. Those are his words. And she said, "No, we are not going to die." Doesn't that diminish the argument that her texts at the very end caused his death?
Oh, it completely does. And while I agree with Fred that this is tragic and what she did was awful, I don't think it's criminal. I don't think it rises to the level of criminality. I don't think it rises to the level of what she did, creating her own self-made duty. There's no duty of care here. She didn't owe him a duty of care. Just by texting him and being his friend and all these examples of all the different texts, some of them were good, some of them were bad, that doesn't rise to the level of creating a duty for her to actually stop him from going through with this. We've got 2 very troubled people who together had a toxic environment, had a toxic relationship, but that doesn't cause this accident. That doesn't cause him from taking his death. He took his death. He took his life. He caused the death. She didn't, and she should not be held criminally responsible for this.
And the other argument is that she took no active participation, I mean, physically in his suicide.
Right.
No overt act other than speech. Are we going to criminalize speech, and isn't that a violation of the First Amendment? That'll be an issue as well. Guys, you're going to stick around because we're also waiting for a verdict in the Bill Cosby sexual assault trial. So as soon as that happens, if it happens, could be a deadlock jury and a mistrial. We'll wait and see, but we'll be coming back to you. Ashley, Fred,
Thank
thanks.
you.
And as we wait for that, another Fox News alert for you. The manhunt is now over for 2 escaped inmates accused of killing 2 corrections officers during their escape Tuesday in Georgia. A multi-state search ended after the men went on a spree that authorities say involved stealing several cars and holding up an elderly couple, holding them captive in their home. But the break came when they were spotted in one of those stolen cars in Tennessee yesterday. And then after a high-speed chase and a crash, the inmates ran into the woods. But a vigilant local homeowner spotted the pair.
At that point in time, the homeowner stepped out and held the people there by gunpoint until another neighbor came to assist him. We're very thankful that the cooperation from the homeowners led to this today.
So thankful. 42-year-old Sergeant Christopher Monica and 58-year-old Sergeant Curtis Ballou were killed during Tuesday's escape.
New information on a controversial upcoming television interview. Conspiracy theorist Alex Jones releasing an unedited version of his interview with Megyn Kelly, which is set to air on NBC this weekend. The talk radio host has claimed that the Sandy Hook school shooting was a hoax. Jones saying on his website that the full interview will be available to counter Kelly's report, which he calls a fraud. Let's bring in our panel. Judy Miller, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, author, and Fox News contributor. And Emily Jashinsky joins us, commentary writer for The Washington Examiner. Good to see you both. Does Megyn Kelly have a good point in the face of severe criticism that you're just giving a conspiracy theorist a platform by saying that look, we may not agree with the things he says, but he has a pretty substantial audience. He says controversial things. He needs to be confronted about those things. Judy?
Well, I don't think that's her intention. If you look at the tape that Alex Jones released on Thursday night about their little schmoozing before the interview, she says, or at least according to the tape that he's released, that this is not going to be a, quote, gotcha interview. All I can say is that I hope Megyn Kelly asks tougher questions and follow-up questions than she did of Vladimir Putin. But no, I don't think it's wise in our highly polarized environment where we have people shooting congressmen and senators on baseball fields to turn around and give a platform to a man who is a conspiracy theorist and giving great pain to the parents of the Sandy Hook Elementary School. I just think that's completely
inappropriate. Well, it does cause pain. There's no question about this. Let me just quickly, Emily, read NBC's response to this. Despite Alex Jones' efforts to distract from and ultimately prevent the airing of our report, we remain committed to giving viewers context and insight into a controversial and polarizing figure, how he relates to the President of the United States and influences others, and to getting this serious story right. Tune in on Sunday. Well, the last part, of course, is their plug for viewers and ratings and revenue. But Emily, who's right in this debate?
Yeah, well, this is a really tough question. I will say I do disagree. I mean, I think it's sort of unfortunate that I think Alex Jones has the president's ear, but the fact of the matter is that he does. And I think that's almost unprecedented to have someone who is on the fringe as much as Alex Jones is, that does actually have influence on the president. I don't know that he has that much influence, but he's someone that the president sort of would talk to during the campaign from all accounts. So I actually think that it's very wise and important for Megyn Kelly to be asking tough questions of him. I hope that she actually asks the tough questions of him, because there's a little bit of a contradiction between the statement she put out saying, I want to ask those tough questions, and what we heard in the recording. She's in a tough situation either way, but it is important to ask serious questions of Alex Jones.
All right, Judy and Emily, stick around for just a moment. We're going to pause. We have much more to get to, including the Senate health care plan, largely out of sight due to the media attention on the ongoing Russia investigation, what it means for the GOP effort to replace and repeal Obamacare. Plus, as the White House pushes back against a steady stream of leaks and anonymously sourced stories, a new warning from DOJ.
Very well. That's why he uses Twitter. And where would we be without Twitter? Because everything we know, or a lot of what we know from A, leaks, and B, what he has said himself on Twitter. So the president, I think, doth protest too much. Twitter has worked out well for him. I think journalists are careful about these stories. But yeah, I understand his frustration. Even Jim Comey, the man he fired, said there is no evidence of collusion that he's seen so far. But we'll have to see what Mueller says, and the special prosecutor.
Emily, it's interesting because the president yesterday tweeted that Mueller is conflicted, meaning he has a conflict of interest. And if you read the statute, he arguably does. Now today, he's saying that Rod Rosenstein, who's Mueller's boss, is conflicted. I'm being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt. He's clearly referring to Rosenstein. I mean, Rosenstein's going to be a key witness if it's true that obstruction deals with the firing of Comey. So, I mean, isn't the president making a valid point?
He is making a valid point, and I think it's sort of one of those things where it's interesting that he calls it witch hunt, because I think other people are looking at it and they're saying, yeah, I mean, that's an actual conflict of interest. So where he's saying, oh, this is a witch hunt, it's invalidated, people on the other side are saying, I mean, you're kind of right about that. So it's an interesting situation. I think the press loves that Trump is on Twitter, frankly, as a member of the press, because we always get the breathless articles about every single thing he tweets, the splashy segments on every single tweet. The press loves that he's on Twitter, frankly. That's where he's wrong.
Yeah, Obama was pretty aloof. Trump is just the opposite. And in fact, I do want to put up the accusation leveled at Mueller yesterday. Here is the Trump tweet. Judy, he says, you are witnessing the single greatest witch hunt in American political history, led by some very bad and conflicted people. The conflicted comes from the statute, which says that if you have a personal relationship with somebody who's central to the case, i.e. James Comey, you cannot serve as special counsel. So does it appear to you, Judy, that the president's trying to make the case that Mueller is so conflicted he should step down?
Well, I think we know, Greg, from earlier reporting that the president was thinking about firing Mueller.
Well, he can't do that. Only Rosenstein can do that.
Yeah, but that's what Chris Ruddy, the president's very good friend and a journalist, floated to see what would happen. I think President Trump wanted to see if he could get away with that. He clearly knows he can't now. Right. I understand his frustration, but this is not fake news. Paul Manafort, his former campaign advisor, was fired. Attorney General Sessions had to recuse himself because of his contacts with the Russians. Mike Flynn, his former national security advisor, was fired for failing to report some income from the Russians. Right. Again and again and again. The president can call this fake news all he wants, but until we get to the bottom of it and Mueller has a say and does his investigation, this is going to continue, the leaks are going to continue, and the president will remain on Twitter.
Emily, it's well known that Mueller and Comey have a long-standing, close personal relationship, colleagues, partners, allies for years and years and years, mentor, protege relationship. So think of it this way. I guess if you're Donald Trump, he's saying to himself, wait a minute, is it fair to me as a potential defendant to have the prosecutor decide whether to prosecute me based on his close, good friends' credibility? How is that fair to me?
Yeah, I think, though, at the same time, it does sort of betray this. The president is nervous about this, right? And when you look at people like Michael Flynn, when you look at Carter Page, when you look at Paul Manafort, I expect that that's where any collusion narrative will stop and any evidence they find will stop with his satellites. I think that's something that we saw when James Comey's opening statement before he testified. He said, the president said, look, if any of my satellites did anything wrong, we need to figure that out. I think that's where it's going to end. But I do think this effort to discredit and undermine Mueller is really not going to be beneficial for anybody. I think it was silly to leak that to the press. I think it's not going to be good for American democracy if we try to undermine the special counsel.
All right. Emily and Judy, good to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
And there's other new twist in the Russia probe. Vice President Mike Pence hires outside legal counsel to represent him in the multiple investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 election. And while the probe is reportedly expanding to include Jared Kushner's business dealings. Breaking all this down for us, Lisa Booth. She's the founder of High Noon Strategies. And joining us soon will be Simon Rosenberg, and he'll join us in a moment from the Washington Examiner.
Hi, Heather.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. First of all, let's tackle Kushner first, okay? Want to talk about him and how this will impact the president politically.
Well, look, that's to be seen. I'm not convinced at this point that the investigation is going to have a huge impact on the 2018 elections, because up until this point, we have no evidence of collusion. The former FBI director himself said that the president wasn't under investigation for collusion. And then you get to this, at least what has been recently reported, that the possible obstruction of justice is being looked at. But look, it was former FBI director Comey who had said that no reasonable prosecutor would bring the case against Hillary Clinton. But as Senator Risch pointed out during the Senate intelligence hearing with Comey himself, that nobody's ever been prosecuted for using the words hope. So if you use the former FBI director's own logic, there doesn't seem to be a case against President Trump for obstruction of justice. So I think until there is an actual shoe that drops, if that ever happens, I don't necessarily think that the political impact is going to be as big as the Democratic Party would like to hope so.
Yeah, and Jared Kushner's lawyer spoke out and said, you know, this is basically just normal. In fact, he says it would be standard practice for the special counsel to examine financial records to look for anything related to Russia. So they're not concerned about it.
Well, yeah, sure. The special counsel should be doing his job. Mueller should be doing his job. His team should be doing his job. But I will also caution this, Heather. You know, as someone who really wants for Americans to regain trust in our institutions, the special counsel is doing himself no favors by releasing leaks himself. Who knows who it was on his team that released the obstruction of justice aspect of this? But I don't think he does himself any favors to have credibility in the eyes of a lot of Americans. And I think the media has done themselves no favors, as evidenced by recent polling saying that the majority of Americans believe that there is now fake news because there's been so many stories that have been false. So I do think that I caution the special counsel to stop with these leaks, conduct the investigation, and to allow Americans to believe that what he's doing is ethical and above board.
Yeah, it's just getting tossed around all over the place. Now, let's bring in Simon Rosenberg. He's the president and founder of Indian and former Bill Clinton campaign advisor. Thank you for joining us.
Sure,
and you just heard we were speaking about Jared Kushner and this leak, another unnamed source, but that he's now going to be under investigation with the special counsel.
Yeah, look, I think we're at the very beginning of this investigation. I think that, you know, this could go on for a very long time if history, you know, plays its course here. We could be another 6 months or a year until we really know, as was being said earlier, at least right, we don't really know what happened. And so I think that my view on this is that the thing that I keep coming back to is that if Donald Trump was innocent, why is he fighting so hard? He could have just said, I'm going to put all my cards on the table, I'll testify right away, let's get this over with so I can move on and govern. That's not what happened. He's acting guilty, right? And I think he's made enormous mistakes in how he's managed this and has made it far worse for himself by drawing attention to it, like he did today in multiple tweets. He should be trying to talk about anything other than this,
but that could
and yet
be
he keeps coming back to it.
He's so adamant that he is innocent. I mean, you could look at it the other way. But let's now also talk about the vice president hiring his own attorney. Simon, I'll let you tackle that first.
Sure. Look, listen, I think there's a real issue here for Pence, is that in the middle of November, a letter went from Congress warning him that there were things that were up with Flynn. There's no way that he didn't know about this. The letter was directed to him personally from senior members of Congress that he needed to look into what was going on with Flynn and whether or not he was representing other governments. He didn't do it, and he kept somebody who was at the time, you know, on the payroll of other governments, going into national security briefings under his watch. He's going to have to explain that clearly to the special counsel.
This also gives him more time to do the own job, the job that he's there to do. I have to wrap it up. I'm so sorry. We are out of time. We had a lot of breaking news.